Bob's Burgers does trans content, and if you are thinking to yourself, hang on one moment, I'm pretty sure we've been here before, then well done for your memory, because yes, we have in fact already had a video going over trans representation within Bob's Burgers. But that was quite some time ago, and the situation of how the show handles our community has progressed since that point. If you want to go and watch that video right now quickly, then I will have a link in the description below for it, but if you don't worry. I will briefly describe my conclusions and takeaway from that as far as it's relevant for what got changed in the last 2 seasons that have come out since.
Like this?
Think we got it.
Bob's Burgers is a classic comedic take on the family cartoon sitcom. One with frankly some more enjoyable characters, fun plot lines, and diversity than the other peers that you might be able to think of. It's certainly a hell of a lot better than Family Guy, American Dad, or Simpsons.
Homer, you've got company.
Bob's Burgers features at the centre of it the Belcher family, with Bob as the patriarch and main owner of the diner that the show is named after, and where he functions as the cook of it. Linda is his wife and the cashier/clerk for the business, who exists as a fun counterpart to the more serious nature of Bob. An interesting take on how other shows often have the guy be the jovial one who has to be restrained by his poor wife. Tina is the clearly very neurodivergent oldest child, though now that I've said it out loud I realise that both Jean and Louise are also pretty neurodivergent too, so that's not really a great distinguishing feature to point out exactly.
It's like looking in a mirror. No, it isn't, Gene. Who's Gene?
I already can't tell who's who.
Tina is always crushing on people and super awkward. Jean is the silly comedic child who's also kinda chill in a lot of places. And Louise is the crazy one who's always doing wild stuff and engages in pranks and dangerous things. The important real aspect to pick up here is that all of them are a family. More so than other shows, in that we see how much they really do care for each other and help one another consistently get illustrated. It's a lot more wholesome in that regard.
But you know, it's worth it if it means Tina will be a happy teenager.
Which kinda ties into our trans conversation a bit, because that attitude does affect how the writers and show creators have approached diversity and minority inclusion compared to previous animated shows that I have critiqued. Let me explain, because it's at this point that we kinda need to do that summarization of Bob's Burgers' trans failures and successes up to this point. A summarization which heavily centers itself around the character of Marshmallow, a trans sex worker that appeared first in Shish Kebab with a few other trans sex workers.
Where do I put my coat?
Oh, hey, Marshmallow.
My initial opinion of that episode was that while the general attitude from Bob and from the kids and from the wider tone the show took was attempting to be in a positive direction, was trying to be kind with allowing these characters to have personalities and identities that went beyond just their gender or sexuality, it did still ultimately fall back on a lot of harmful stereotypes of transgender sex workers, especially transgender POC sex workers. Stereotypes that we have also seen illustrated in stuff like Sex and the City.
You talking to me?
Bob's Burgers also had a pretty decent fixation during the animation of the episode featuring those trans women that highlighted the features that were used to denote the status of them. Various elements that, well, that are common dysphoric aspects for your trans femme community and which are often seen as gross or unladylike.
Because you are...
It's a bunch of shit that at the end of the day isn't the worst thing I've ever seen, but would be preferably not happening at all within the context that the show used. Now, one of the bigger things that I latched onto as an issue, as well, aside from the visual way in which they clocked these trans characters for the audience, was the way in which the voice actors were selected for the trans people, all of them being voiced by cis men. It's the usual and commonplace joke presentation of a trans woman, wherein you give them an incredibly deep voice as part of the comedic narrative built around how they look plus how they sound for cis people to get a kick out of. And it comes across both kind of disingenuous and also pretty mean-spirited.
Marshmallow in the house. Now put a burger in my mouth.
Oh, hey, Marshmallow.
Alongside that, it's also another situation of a great place for trans people looking to get into the voice acting industry, having a perfect for them job taken away and given to people who do not have so many issues getting into most industries. Cis men. And that is actually the point that I want to start with in regards to how Bob's Burgers improved going into season 14 and season 15 with its trans representation. On the idea of the voice actor for a trans woman, and who, ideally, should be getting that role. Oh, and one quick thing before we move along. Some people on Reddit and in the comments of the last video had argued for a whole host of characters in Bob's Burgers who are not canonically transgender, being trans adjacent or gender fucky enough that those people connected to them in that way. If that is something that you feel to be true, if Bob or whoever feels like a trans icon to you, then I can't take that away, as your internal interpretation of the show matters most to you. But I also can't really, frankly, do a huge amount of discussion around it, because that's a very subjective bond formed on the fan side, and it's not so heavily leaned into on the creation side. If Bob had an episode coming out as genderqueer or whatever, we would be having quite a different conversation. But he hasn't yet, and so feel what you want to feel, but I can't really speak to all fan experiences.
Time to focus on your good daughter, Jean.
I'm pretty.
Because the only major trans character to reappear consistently in the show from that initial episode that I discussed last time we were here is the character of Marshmallow. And she had a voice actor change from David Herman, who was one of those cis men I was having a bit of a grumpy about, to Yari Jones. Now, who is Yari Jones? I hear you presumably asking, because, well, it must be someone important, right? Otherwise, what the hell are you even doing here? And yes, it is massively important, as Yari Jones is a trans actress, and not just a trans actress, but also a trans POC actress who had previously had small roles in both Pose and Transparent as far as TV shows go.
My legacy figure is Marsha P. Johnson.
The POC thing is a little bit important too, because Marshmallow is a black trans woman, and David Herman was a white cis man. So you know it's nice to see a bit of intersectional success in regards to getting a person reflective of the character on the job of voicing her. So for all the reasons that I mentioned beforehand, this is a very good change. And it's a change that only happened because people brought up concerns around this voice acting decision initially to the creators/producers of the show, and they finally decided to make an adjustment for the better. This is great, because not only does it give a trans actor another foot up in the industry, not only does it give people who watch Bob's Burgers now an actual trans woman voicing a character that they see as trans, and so goes a long way to building real trans people as a thing that exists for those audiences, not only does it put a trans woman in the cast and around Marshmallow in a way that allows her to use her own experiences to influence the continuing development of that trans person, but on top of all those very, very good and important things to bring up, it signals that Bob's Burgers as a show was willing to change, was willing to listen to criticism and not just get defensive about it and complain about woke or DEI or whatever the hell people are on these days as a buzzword, but to see that criticism as an opportunity to learn. And that's sort of the whole point of pointing out these issues in the first place, is for future changes and adjustments to occur that fix what are seen as problems. If Bob's Burgers can do it, any show can do it. It is a possibility and an option. And I think that is quite heartwarming as a reminder of how things can progress if the people involved are willing to do the work to actually listen and be introspective about what they create and how they create it. It certainly allows you to avoid the mistakes of stuff like Amelia Perez, for example, which... Jesus Christ, I'll get into that one in a future video, don't you worry. Shit like that should not still be happening in 2025. You really would have hoped people involved would have gotten smarter about it. This all brings us, though, to what Marshmallow, with this new voice actress, actually gets up to in season 14 and 15. Is it more moments that build her as someone that defies trans stereotype and introduces trans identity to the audience in a positive and fun way without necessarily standing out from the normal Bob's Burgers formula? Well, let's find out with our first returning moment of Marshmallow in episode 1 of season 14. Oh damn, straight into the premiere. They really wanted to show off the new voice actress, huh?
Don't be afraid to shout out compliments.
Oh, sorry. It's really good.
Fight at the Not Okay Corral is the name of the episode. And a big central part of this episode is that most of it is taking place in an imaginary story that is being told. And it's within that imaginary story that is being told, filled with characters from the show and lives of the Belchers, that we find the appearance of Marshmallow.
First up, married Sheriff Bob versus Louise.
Marshmallow is one of the townspeople who runs the bean blasting competition in the western town between the two groups to see who gets to win the hypothetical-ish argument over chores.
Greedy, smelly sheriffs.
What if I just pop down to the pharmacy and ask for drugs?
She gets a fun little joke about her tiny hat that she has on, and then that's it. That's all we get of Marshmallow for this episode. Now, you might be thinking, that's not very much at all, and seems like a pretty small amount to base a trans representation video on, and that's 'cause there's another episode to talk about, you lot, alright? It's got a bit more substance in it, just calm down. But also, I would argue that what we are seeing here is super important as well to the idea of trans representation becoming normalized. When we get to just casually appear like this, just popping up as repeat characters who exist in the world, that goes a long way towards getting the cis audience used to the idea that trans people are just around.
Please enjoy my tiny hat. A baby gave it to me.
It entrenches the notion that trans people are not required to justify their appearance by having to constantly be doing trans stuff and special things to denote that. And that works because Marshmallow is an established trans character in Bob's Burgers. And so whenever we see her, we know that trans fact already, and therefore it doesn't need to be repeated by her every time that she appears.
Didn't you used to go there? I'm so sorry.
I don't know if I'll ever wiggle again.
And that can do just as much work, if not more so these days, than having a special trans episode with a bunch of information dumped on you about trans lives in it. A lot of time people can find that info themselves if they're interested very readily online, or might have already seen that kind of special character moment. What we need more of is just trans people appearing in general franchises in ways that are not reliant upon their transness. It's also important just for introducing us the new voice actor for Marshmallow, and getting that change recognised and familiarised with. You know, tick it off bright and early so it's not so alarming later on. And that later on brings us to our next episode featuring Marshmallow as voiced by Yari Jones. Season 15's episode 6, Open Mic Night. An episode all about the kids hosting an open mic night at the restaurant, and it all getting completely out of hand and leading to all those jokes and comedic moments that make these kind of shows work.
Get a line. Tina will be on crowd control.
I will?
A line.
You know, the sitcom formula that has worked for so long. Simple situation that then gets wildly blown out of proportion thanks to the wacky antics and identities involved in it that leads to hilarious resolutions and responses. Marshmallow appears to us 6 minutes in, when the Belchers are discussing the fact that they don't want to do the open mic night anymore due to the cost, but the kids have already gotten everybody interested in the open mic night, so it's kinda all turning into some of those hijinks I mentioned. And Marshmallow, upon entry, gets a basic welcome from all the people in the diner, which makes sense because she is a regular and friend of most of the family from previous episodes. And then all of them say something really nice about Marshmallow's cool as fuck outfit that she somewhat dismisses by just saying it's what she wears regularly for her work.
Hi, Marshmallow.
Marshmallow, I love your outfit.
It's just what I wear to work.
Her work being something that the show doesn't lean to heavily mocking at all and just treats as part of who she is and what she enjoys. It's not just trans positive. Bob's Burgers is also kind of sex positive and sex worker positive too, so that's a thumbs up from me in that regard. Marshmallow then acts as a mediary between the kids and their parents about the open mic night, saying how this is a chance for the kids to be expressive through creativity.
The talent show was canceled, Bob.
The talent show is canceled.
The talent show is canceled, Bob.
We also learn that Marshmallow wants to do a song as well at this point, because her parents are coming into town, and she sees this as a great opportunity to, I guess, do something for them. It's not really explained to us just yet. It's possible we might find out more of her motivations on the night itself, but we see here a lot more of how Marshmallow is just part of the general plotline that the show does. That she exists, and has connections that are positive to all the other characters, and gets to be around them in ways that are not defined or expressed explicitly through her transness. It's continual and good normalization that feels better now that we don't have that spectre of a black trans woman being voiced by a cis white man. It does really ease the whole being okay with it a hell of a lot when it doesn't feel so, well, as if someone is wearing a costume of a group of people that they maybe shouldn't be wearing a costume of.
Cops are outside!
Well, I guess that's that. Party's over.
The night comes, and as Marshmallow arrives to the event with her parents, the fire marshal is in the process of telling the Belchers that he is shutting it down and fining them, which does not seem to sit that well with Marshmallow, who has clearly put some stuff on the line for this moment. And so Marshmallow, who apparently knows the fire marshal already, challenges him on the fact that he is not about to shut her down, and tells him how her parents have never heard her sing before, and then Marshmallow just straight up blackmails the fire marshal with the fact that she rescued him from a club one time when he decided to dance with an open flame out and almost killed himself doing it.
And did you start a fire, Marty?
I did start a fire.
And I carried you out of that building.
This is all part of a second bit of Marshmallow's character, namely that she's an absolute goddamn badass who is willing to do some pretty extreme stuff to get her way. So it's no surprise actually that Louise, the youngest child, really loves her, seeing as that feels like the exact vibe that she connects with too.
Hey, Marshmallow's here. Hi, girl!
Hi, girl, yourself, you little back to beach baby.
Marshmallow gets to do her performance. It's one of the best and actually most musical of the entire goddamn event. It's a really beautiful indie version of Seabird by the Alessi brothers.
I don't listen to the news no more.
A song that I want to guarantee nobody's ever heard of because the Alessi brothers were a one-hit wonder back in the mid-1970s, and that one hit was not Seabird, which charted at 96 in Australia and nowhere else. It's a song all about the haunting nature of distance and change, about the gap between people that can occur when they desire different things. The song seems to have a more explicit romantic bent, with the bridge, "Suddenly you're with me, turn and you're not there, like a ghost you haunt me, you find warmth in a one-night bed," but the rest of it feels applicable in a rather general sense, to just any time a person goes far away from another, and they feel like they don't know them anymore. Like a seabird out at ocean while you remain on the land. Also, because I know people are gonna have a go at me over this if I don't say it, Yes, the song did get used in the ending episode of Sex Education, a place where it makes sense with those themes as the characters find themselves moving away from each other into their lives as adults. And also in a side mission involving Howard the Pigeon Guy in Spider-Man 2, which is also about the same idea of moving on to something else, somewhere else.
I'll follow the waterfront for a bit, until I think of a new home.
So a few of you might actually very much know this song already. Wild that it's making this many pop culture appearances 40 years later. You really gotta wonder which person unearthed that song from their past and decided they had to shove it into as many places as they physically could. Back to the context of Marshmallow. Viewing this in relation to it being the big song that she chose to do for her parents that she established as being old and living far away from her, really does add some context to her backstory that kind of involves the trans stuff when you think about it, to be sure, but also isn't dependent upon that trans stuff either.
Big enough to keep me away from you.
Any person can find themselves estranged from their parents in some way by distance and time, and thinking about how they have become like that lonely seabird, so far away from the land and their home that they seem almost like a ghost to the people from back there. But for Marshmallow and for trans people specifically, that kind of sentiment carries a lot more weight when the people who knew us before we started transitioning perhaps do see the person they used to think of us as a ghost. It's a very well picked song for the moment, and one that goes a long way towards being a beautiful unspoken speech about who Marshmallow is and how she thinks of herself. Yet again, the intelligence here comes from the fact that Bob's Burgers is managing to craft these experiences without having to transform it into a trans episode explicitly. Is able to deliver these facts and these ideas and get the audience feeling things without tainting the whole thing with making it a little too on the nose and too blasé. Something which I think you can more safely do when a character is already established as explicitly transgender previously. If a character isn't explicitly transgender, you kinda need to do something to make it clear so that we're not stuck arguing with cis people over just trying to get them to recognise that a trans character exists at all. Well, a lot of examples, but one that jumps to mind immediately is Bridget from Guilty Gear. That one got so bad that the creators had to step in to say that nope, it was definitely meant to be changed to make her a trans woman. She is a trans woman. Stop saying she's just a boy that dresses up as a girl, okay? Trans woman. But when that work has already been done, we get to just see trans people being that second part. Being people. With lives and thoughts and a whole world beyond just that first identifier. A world that is coloured, sure, by their identity, but is not entirely dependent upon it. And the end of her song is just her getting a clap from the audience and going over to hug her parents, who were clearly emotionally taken away by her performance that they've never heard her do before. And that's it. The episode moves on quickly to a butt song and then ends.
Draw a face on your butt and then kiss it. I want to draw a star on your butt and then wish it.
But I think within that, we see all the points that I've been making through this video, that I've been saying about why this Bob's Burgers trans representation is a success. It doesn't need to be open for it to be meaningful. It doesn't need to say all the buzzwords or act like a corporate HR going through and ticking the boxes to get the ribbon of doing trans stuff right. It can just be a trans character, voiced by a trans person, living within the world they have created, and being accepted by people as another human. And that is way, way better than the sanitized version I was previously getting at, that it does so often feel like we are getting when people push themselves to make a trans thing. This just comes across as more natural, and that way that it comes across affects how the audience is going to connect with it. affects how the cis audience and trans audience are going to have a better connection to trans identity because they watched Bob's Burgers and this show and this character. I'm happy to say that this is one of those 10 out of 10 moments for trans rep. A real sign of how a creative group that actively wants to change for the better and improve upon their writing, and do seem to be honestly good writers with good intentions, can go a hell of a long way to creating a trans redemption. I didn't have the kindest of words for the original Bob's Burgers trans inclusion. I found it to be a little bit falling into stereotypes and relying upon somewhat tasteless copies of other pop culture that treat us negatively. But here, we see that foundation worked upon in a way that I cannot take any fault with. So, huge thumbs up from me, and play us away, Marshmallow, to the outro.
Seabird, seabird, fly home.
If you liked what I said here, or enjoyed the video, or just find what I do to be great background noise for your life, then that's fantastic. If you want to support the channel, a great way to do that is by going to either my Patreon or my Ko-Fi and subscribing there, /helping to fund what I do. YouTube ad revenue is a little bit spotty, and the sponsorships are not as frequent as I would like to make this all reliable. And so support from you, the viewers, is the best way to getting that safety net and security to keep focusing on making videos. The names of those in the $5 up category should be scrolling past the screen right now, and I appreciate everyone on there for helping to keep this channel going, and paying towards my bills like food, power, rent, internet, and cat management. It means a lot to me, and I'm always eternally grateful to people who help my creative interests be something that I get to do in a full-time capacity like this. I have a ton more trans rep to dig into and to explore. Also, I can finally make a giant video in like 2 years' time, collating my experiences and making some kind of definitive statement on how to do trans representation right, before I move on to an entirely different topic for this channel. And so trust me, there is a hell of a lot more content to come about trans things and trans issues and trans representation. I also want to just thank everyone who watched this video. That also means a lot that people are engaging with what I make. And if you want to watch more of my stuff, there is a ton of videos out there to do so. If you want to find positive things, my advice is look for the videos that don't have transphobia in the title, because that's how I've been basically breaking them up. And I know a lot of people seem to think that I focus too much on negative representation, which there is a lot of, but there's also a lot of good moments and happy moments too, like here in this video. So if you go and click on the trans episode of playlist, that's all videos about good representation. Other than all of that, thanks for everything that anyone does to help this channel in whatever capacity you can, and hope that you all have a great day.